Story 1 of 9. Major fire at Geelong oil refinery disrupts Australia's fuel supply amid global crisis. Major fire at Geelong oil refinery disrupts Australia's fuel supply amid global crisis. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Viva Energy refinery in Corio, Geelong, was engulfed in a major fire starting around 11 p.m. on April 15, 2026, after multiple explosions were reported. The fire took approximately 13 hours to be extinguished, with firefighters declaring it under control shortly after 12 p.m. on April 16, 2026. The refinery supplies about 50% of Victoria's fuel and 10% of Australia's total fuel supply, processing up to 120,000 barrels of oil per day. The fire began in the MOGAS, motor gasoline, section of the refinery, specifically in the alkylation unit, due to an equipment failure or mechanical fault. Production at the refinery was reduced to 80% capacity for diesel and jet fuel, and 60% for petrol immediately after the fire, with plans to restore production to over 90% within weeks. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC report that the fire was contained to a small area of the refinery, while Newscomau describes it as potentially catastrophic if it had spread to fuel storage tanks. The Guardian states that the fire primarily impacted petrol production, while some sources like Newscomau suggest there may be broader impacts on fuel supply depending on repair timelines. The Age reports that the fire was catastrophic in its potential impact, while the ABC and Guardian downplay the severity, emphasizing that production will be restored quickly. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, SBS News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 2 of 9. Assassination attempt at White House Correspondents Dinner targets Trump and officials. Assassination attempt at White House Correspondents Dinner targets Trump and officials. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Cole Thomas Allen, 31, from Torrance, California, is accused of attempting to assassinate U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House Correspondents Association dinner on April 26, 2026, at the Washington Hilton Hotel. Allen was armed with a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, a .38 caliber pistol, and multiple knives during the attack. Allen allegedly rushed a security checkpoint at the Washington Hilton Hotel on April 26, 2026, around 8:30 to 8:40 p.m. local time, firing his shotgun and injuring a Secret Service agent who was wearing a bulletproof vest. Allen was charged with attempted assassination of the president, transportation of firearms to commit a felony, and unlawful discharge of a firearm during violence. Allen was detained and appeared in court on April 29, 2026, where he agreed to remain in custody pending trial. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC report that Allen was not shot during the incident, but the New York Post and some sources suggest he was injured during the attack. The Guardian and ABC state that Allen was not cooperating with authorities, while The Edge and Newscomau imply he may have provided some information to police. The Guardian and ABC report that Allen's manifesto was sent to family members minutes before the attack, but the New London Police Department says they were contacted 2 hours after the shooting. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, SBS News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 3 of 9. Australia blocks return of ISIS-linked families from Syria despite US pressure. Australia blocks return of ISIS-linked families from Syria despite US pressure. Here's what every outlet agrees on. 4 Australian women and 9 children, 13 total, left Al Roj camp in Syria on April 24, 2026, and were turned back before reaching Damascus airport due to Australia's refusal to receive them, as reported by Syria's information ministry. The group had received Australian passports while still in Syria, delivered by an unidentified individual, reportedly assisted by Western Sydney Dr. Jamal Rifi. Australia has previously repatriated 2 groups, 8 orphaned children in 2019 and 4 women with 13 children in 2022, but has since refused further repatriations. A U.S. Department of State official expressed frustration in a February 2026 letter, stating Australia had dug in on its opposition to repatriating the group from Ulroj camp. The Ulroj camp, near the Iraq-Syria border, houses relatives of suspected Islamic State militants and is controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and news.com.au state the group was turned back by Syrian authorities before reaching Damascus airport due to Australia's refusal, while ABC suggests Syrian authorities may have acted on public statements rather than a direct request. The Guardian and news.com.au report the group left Ulroj camp on April 24, 2026, but The Age mentions a February 2026 letter expressing US frustration over a failed repatriation attempt that month. The Guardian and ABC state the group includes 4 women and 9 children, 13 total, while news.com.au occasionally refers to 11 families or 34 women and children in broader context, which may cause confusion. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, and The Age. Story 4 of 9. Violence and arrest over death of 5-year-old Kumanjayi Little Baby in Alice Springs. Violence and arrest over death of 5-year-old Kumanjayi Little Baby in Alice Springs. Here's what every outlet agrees on. 5-year-old Kumanjayi Little Baby went missing from old-timers Illaperoni town camp in Alice Springs on Saturday, April 25, 2026, at around 11:30 p.m. Her body was found approximately 5 kilometers south of old-timers town camp near the Todd River on Thursday, April 30, 2026, around midday. Jefferson Lewis, 47, was arrested on Thursday, April 30, 2026, near Charles Creek Town Camp in Alice Springs in connection with Kumanjayi Little Baby's death. Lewis was charged with the murder of Kumanjayi Little Baby and 2 counts of sexual intercourse without consent on May 3, 2026. Violence erupted outside Alice Springs Hospital on Thursday, April 30, 2026, after Lewis's arrest, involving tear gas, rubber bullets, and the destruction of police vehicles and ambulances. But not all outlets told the same story. The ABC and Guardian report that Lewis was beaten by a crowd before his arrest, but the SMH and The Age describe him as being bashed to within an inch of his life with more graphic details. The ABC and Guardian state that Lewis was transferred to Darwin for his own safety and that of emergency service workers, while the SMH and The Age do not specify the exact reason for the transfer beyond safety concerns. The ABC and Guardian mention that Lewis was unconscious when police arrived, but the SMH and The Age describe him as being in a sustained attack with more severe injuries. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, SBS News, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 5 of 9. Australia's 2026-27 budget, CGT, negative gearing reforms and housing policy. Australia's 2026-27 budget, CGT, negative gearing reforms and housing policy. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Treasurer Jim Chalmers stated in multiple interviews, Commonwealth Bank podcast, Channel 7, that any changes to capital gains tax, CGT, or negative gearing would not generate a huge amount of new revenue in the short term, with estimates ranging from $2 billion to $6.5 billion annually over time. Chalmers confirmed in interviews, Commonwealth Bank podcast, Channel 7, that existing property investors would be protected under transitional arrangements, meaning reforms would not apply retrospectively to assets already held. The 2026-27 budget is scheduled for May 12, with housing tax reforms, CGT and negative gearing, expected to be announced then. The Grattan Institute estimated that halving the CGT discount and phasing it in over 5 years would generate $6.5 billion annually, while CBA estimated a pre-1999 inflation-adjusted CGT regime plus scrapping negative gearing, grandfathered, would raise $2 billion in the first 4 years and $25 to $30 billion over a decade. Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson accused the Labour government of trying to start an intergenerational war by targeting property investors, framing reforms as unfair to older Australians. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and SMH state Chalmers explicitly said reforms would not apply to existing investments, while news.com.au's April 30 article hints at potential grandfathering without full confirmation. News.com.au's April 30 article suggests Chalmers may remove the 50% CGT discount and replace it with indexation, but The Guardian only mentions a possible return to the pre-1999 inflation-adjusted model without specifying indexation. The Guardian reports Chalmers downplayed revenue expectations, while news.com.au's May 4 article frames his comments as the strongest indication yet of reforms, implying a shift in tone. This story was covered by The Guardian, news.com.au, Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Story 6 of 9. Deadly hantavirus outbreak on cruise ship MV Hondius in Atlantic Ocean. Deadly hantavirus outbreak on cruise ship MV Hondius in Atlantic Ocean. Here's what every outlet agrees on. 3 people have died from a suspected hantavirus outbreak on the cruise ship MV Hondius in the Atlantic Ocean. 1 case of hantavirus infection has been laboratory confirmed, with 5 additional suspected cases among 6 affected individuals. The cruise ship MV Hondius was traveling from Ushuaia, Argentina, to Cape Verde, with stops in South Georgia and St. Helena. The ship is operated by the Dutch-based tour company Oceanwide Expeditions and can accommodate around 170 passengers and 70 crew members. The first person to develop symptoms was a 70-year-old passenger who died on board, and his body is currently on St. Helena. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1, SBS, does not provide a publication date, while Articles 2, 3, and 5 all confirm the outbreak was reported on May 3, 2026. Article 1, SBS, does not mention the specific number of suspected cases, 5, or the location of the ship, Praia, Cape Verde, which are detailed in Articles 2, 3, and 5. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, news.com.au, and SBS News. Story 7 of 9. Rudy Giuliani hospitalized in critical but stable condition. Rudy Giuliani hospitalized in critical but stable condition. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Rudy Giuliani, 81, is in critical but stable condition at a Florida hospital. Ted Goodman is Rudy Giuliani's spokesperson, stating he is a fighter facing challenges with unwavering strength. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social acknowledging Giuliani's hospitalization, calling him "Our fabulous Rudy Giuliani, a true warrior." Giuliani was the former New York City mayor who led the city through the 9/11 aftermath in 2001. Giuliani was disbarred in New York and D.C. over his representation of the Trump campaign in election-related legal matters. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC do not specify the cause of Giuliani's hospitalization, while Newskamau cites the New York Times as the source but does not reveal the cause itself. Newskamau and ABC mention Giuliani was disbarred in New York and D.C., but only ABC explicitly states he was disbarred over his representation of the Trump campaign in election-related legal matters. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Story 8 of 9. Queensland ministers clarify personal relationship timeline amid integrity questions. Queensland ministers clarify personal relationship timeline amid integrity questions. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Queensland ministers Tim Mandaya, Olympic Sport and Racing, and Amanda Cam, Child Safety Families, clarified their relationship timeline after concerns were raised. The relationship between Mandaya and Cam began in June 2023, ended in May 2024, and resumed before being declared in July 2025. Premier David Crisafulli stated both ministers declared the relationship at the appropriate time and assured compliance with the Ministerial Code of Conduct. Lynn Waters, Mandaya's sister-in-law, wrote to Premier Crisafulli on June 27, 2025, alleging the relationship was ongoing for at least 2 years prior to Mandaya's 2025 divorce. The relationship was officially disclosed at a cabinet meeting on July 14, 2025, about 2 weeks after Waters' initial correspondence. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states Mandea's relationship with Cam resumed shortly before it was declared, while Newskamau says it recommenced in June 2025, ahead of the July cabinet disclosure, with no explicit mention of shortly before. ABC notes Mandea's separation from his wife occurred in April 2025, while Newskamau states it happened in April 2024, likely a typo in Newskamau for 2025. Newskamau implies the relationship was temporarily broken up when they were sworn in as ministers in November 2024, but ABC does not explicitly state this timeline for the breakup. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Story 9 of 9. Essential travel checklist for Australians visiting Europe in 2026. Essential travel checklist for Australians visiting Europe in 2026. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Passports for Schengen area travel must be valid for at least 3 months beyond departure, effectively 6 months total validity on entry. Italy requires an international driving permit, IDP, for foreign drivers, and car hire agencies may refuse rental without it. Europe's new entry-exit system, EES, involves fingerprinting and a headshot for first-time travelers since late 2025, with reported long queues at some airports. European wall plugs primarily use Type C, E, and F, 2-round pin types, which are not all cross-compatible. EU Regulation 261/2004 entitles delayed passengers, 3+ hours, to 250 to 600 euros compensation unless caused by extraordinary circumstances, e.g., bad weather. But not all outlets told the same story. The articles are identical in content and do not contain any contradictions or conflicting information. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.